This lecture video is going to be on the chapter called tissue. So it's a large chapter, and there is a lot of reading required, particularly for this chapter. So make sure first you watch this lecture video, and then you read the book. Very important, particularly for this chapter. You read the book, and then you can go back to the lecture video one more time, and then you go to the review sheet, and then you will be prepared for this particular chapter. So let me get some PowerPoint slide, and then we will teach you that chapter in detail. Okay, so we know the definition of tissue. Okay. Tissue is group of cells that they have like similar functions. So group of cells, those who have similar functions is called tissue. And there are 4 types of tissue, we know that. Epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle, and nerve tissue. Okay. So epithelial tissue, by the way, this particular chapter, we are going to go detail in epithelial and connective. Okay. Muscle and nerve, I'm just going to mention a couple of things about them, because muscle tissue we are going to learn detail later on. We have a huge chapter on it. And nerve, we have like multiple chapters at the end of the last part of the semester. So we are going to focus mainly on epithelial and connective in this particular chapter, okay? Mainly. So let's do all of them first. So epithelial tissue, epi means outside. Okay, it covers the surfaces. It covers the surfaces. So this is epithelial tissue, like top of your skin is epithelial tissue, or any hollow organ that you have. Let's say you have blood vessels. So this is the pipeline. So that lining would be epithelial tissue. Okay, you have, let's say, heart. The lining would be epithelial tissue, or stomach. The lining would be, so any hollow organ that you have in digestive, urinary, and reproductive tract, those hollow organs, their lining is epithelial tissue. And epithelial tissue also forms your glands. So whether it is salivary glands, or like right here, you have a pair of salivary glands. So whether it is salivary glands, or whether it is mucus glands, or whether it is all the endocrine glands, those all come from epithelial tissue. So epithelial tissue, they covers the surfaces, such as skin. The top layer of the skin is the example, and then they line the hollow organs, and they form glands. Connective tissue connect, meaning they normally found between adjacent area, between adjacent cells. So they're materials found between cells. So they're connecting. So for example, like bone is a connective tissue, blood is connective tissue, tendon connective tissue, ligaments connective tissue, adipose tissue like fat connective tissue. So they also store energy in that regard. So they have a lot of functions. They do a lot of work in the body. We're going to go detail later on. Muscle tissue, they produce mainly movement, or we can say they produce force. For example, your heart produces a lot of force so that the blood can travel. So there are 3 classes of muscle tissue: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Out of them, skeletal muscle, those are attached to your bone, those are voluntary muscle, meaning you can consciously control them. Voluntarily, you can, so let's say if I want to move my hands, I can move it using these muscles, okay? Because I can do it voluntarily. But if I want to increase the heartbeat, I cannot do it. My body can do it. So that's an involuntary control. So if I do exercise, my body will increase the heartbeat if needed, okay, depending on how extensive that exercise program is. But I, just by sitting here, and cannot increase my heartbeat. Same is true for smooth muscle. So let's say stomach, which is made with like a smooth muscle, if I want, I can't just start making, stomach or gastric movement. But my body, when they're doing digestion, they can't. So cardiac and smooth muscle are involuntary muscle, and skeletal is a voluntary muscle. And nerve tissue, basically, these are the cells, neuron cells. They can produce signals. We call them impulse, or they can produce like electrical signals. And they can manage all the changes that happen inside and outside of your body. We are going to study detail of muscle and nerve, as I said before, later on. So right now, we are going to focus mainly, excuse me, we're going to focus mainly in the epithelial and connective tissue. So let's do the epithelial tissue first. So epithelial tissue. Now this is very interesting, this particular slide, because you have to understand this. But the epithelial tissue, why we put them, why all the cells that we group them together? The reason is they have some common denominators. They have some common features that they all contribute. They all work very similarly. What kind of features? Cellularity, spatial contacts, polarity, basement membrane, avascularity, and regeneration. Now, what does that mean? Cellularity. This is very interesting. Cellularity means it says that epithelial tissue composed almost entirely of cells. Now, if you really think, it does not really make any sense, apparently. Why? Because think about the definition of tissue. You're saying, you're defining a tissue is a group of cells. So, of course, it's going to be a group of cells. So why we're saying epithelial tissues on a separate note that it is composed entirely, almost entirely composed of cells? The reason is when you study connective tissue, very important, when you study connective tissue, we are going to know that connective tissue is not only cells, but they do have some non-cellular materials. Those non-cellular materials are called matrix. I'll give you an example first to understand this. We all know blood is a liquid tissue. And if we take blood in a test tube, and if you spin that test tubes in high speed, blood will separate. Okay? On the bottom will be a lot of red, and on the top, a little bit of yellowish or straw color liquid. So those reds are basically like 99% of them are red blood cells, or together all the blood cells. Some white blood cells and some platelets are there. On the other hand, the top yellow part is we call plasma, which were the part of the connective tissue. They were part. Now, because we forced them to separate, we can see them. So those plasma is referred to as non-cellular material because they are not cell. So they're non-cellular material, that's called matrix. We are going to study a matrix a little bit more detailed when it comes to connective tissue. Now, the reason I mention this now, because epithelial tissue, on the other hand, composed almost entirely of cells, because they also have a little bit underneath called basement membrane. Okay. Spatial contacts. We know epithelial tissue's first function is like they covers. So like this is the cover or lining of the blood vessel. That's like a covering inside. So how do you cover? Like when you cover your bed, you use bed sheet. So you need basically a sheet of cells to make it cover. So how do you make a sheet of cells? You add them. So if you join those sheet of cells side by side, like those cells side by side, so if the cells are attached to their neighbors, they can make a continuous sheet. And that's exactly what they do. So the cell can join to another cell. Like now the question is how they join. There are multiple different ways they can join. Okay. Same thing like in our real life. Like when you're joining two substances, you can join using a glue, you can join using like cement, you can join using a rope, you can join using a belt, you can join using a button. So you can use many things to join, same thing with cell. So when the cell is joining another cell, they can join a different way. So that section we call cell junctions. Okay, so I'm going to come back to this slide a little bit later. So let's move to this particular slide. Okay, so cell junctions basically when the two cells, like they're opposing plasma membrane, they're attached to them. Now the question is how they can be attached. There are a lot of proteins involved. So those transmembrane proteins, meaning they're going through the membrane, those transmembrane, because remember plasma membrane, we have a lipid bilayer as well as a lot of transmembrane protein. Those are the transmembrane. These particular transmembrane protein help two cells to get connected. Either they're connected to their basement membrane or they're connecting to the other cells. So those are called CAMs, cell adhesion molecules. And there are some glue-like material, like a proteoglycan. These are protein carbohydrate complex molecules. So those molecules, they act like a cement, like when you put two bricks side by side and put cement in between to connect them. That's something like that. So they're like a cementing material putting the two membranes together. Now, based on what kind of cementing material, based on what kind of transmembrane protein, we divide those specialized cell junction in three groups: gap junction, tight junction, and desmosomes. So if you follow the name, most of the time you get the answers. Gap junctions, meaning those particular protein that attach to cells, they obviously have gaps, meaning they have connections between those two cells. So those two cells, although they're joined, but they can communicate freely or quickly. So the ions and molecules can move between them easily. So those proteins are called connections. C-O-N-N-E-X-O-N, connections. So they attach those two cells in such a way, they have like a door in between or windows in between so the molecules can move. Tight junction, obviously, follow the name, they're tight, so nothing can move. So when they create the lining of that, like when you're looking at a pipeline, they create the lining, the molecule that are moving here, let's say blood is moving, they don't want to go there. You should have a tube that they can't go. So how do you make a tube? The way you make a tube, basically on the top layer cells, you're connecting them tight. That's tight junction. So the membrane protein, they work in such a way, they create actually like nothing can go through them. So they're tightly enclosed. Desmosomes, the name came from like a name of proteins, but they basically, they are like a lot of CAMs and proteoglycans together. And depending on the structure of the protein, we used to call them three types, like button, belt, and hemi. Nowadays, button and belt together, we call like two types of desmosomes, spot and hemi. Spot means they are spot like a disc, those kind of like a looks like a protein, and hemi is half of them. Like if you have just imagine if you have like a lemon, kind of like a structure or line, that kind of like a protein structure between two cells, or if you have a half of a line, that's hemi, like a half of the sphere. Excuse me. So these are the different type of cell junctions that help cells to make a continuous sheet if necessary. So that's what basically they do. They perform special contacts, polarity. So polarity means like what happened is all these cells, they are attached to a membrane underneath. All the epithelial cells, they're attached to a membrane underneath called basement membrane. So opposite side of the basement membrane is called apical. So basement means basal surface, and opposite side of the basement membrane is called apical surface. Apex means top. So if you imagine the trees, just imagine these, all the trees are on the soil. So the trees are growing up and they're attaching at the soil. So the top of the tree, if you're looking at a forest, the top of the tree is the apical surface, and but attachment to the ground is their basal surface. That's exactly how epithelial cells look like. So this is called polarity, and obviously the basal surface, which is attached, called basement membrane. Now the basement membrane is 2 layers. So I put a slide there just to clarify it because sometimes people get confused right here. They have a layer that this is the, let's say, basement membrane. There are 2 layers. So this is epithelial tissue. So right here, you follow my hand, right here, the top layer is called basal lamina, and the bottom layer is called reticular lamina. In most cases, the basal lamina is secreted or created by the epithelial tissue, and reticular lamina is created or secreted by the connective tissue, those who are underneath. And basal lamina can be also divided into 2 halves. Lamina lucida means more clear layer. Lucida means clear. And lamina densa, dense layer. Materials are a lot more dense. Okay, what protein exists in those layers? You do not need to study that. That's like you study in cell biology. So when you take an upper level class, you're going to go exactly what proteins are here, what proteins are here, what proteins are here, what are the collagen are here, and how they interact. Those details you learn in cell biology, not here. Here, this information is more than enough. So now, the very important, interesting part of the epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue are avascular, meaning they don't have blood vessels. So if they do not have blood vessels, obviously blood cannot go there because they don't have blood vessels. If blood doesn't go there, oxygen cannot go there. And we know the cell, do need oxygen to survive. So if oxygen is not supplied there, then the cells cannot have oxygen and they're dead. So all your cells on the skin, let's say you have like the top layer, which consists of, let's say, 20 to 50 layers of cells. Can it be dead? Because they don't have blood vessels? Arguably it is, because blood takes the oxygen, and without oxygen, we know cells cannot survive because they need at least oxygen to survive, and then nutrients, then other things. So now, so the dead cells you're losing every day. An integumentary system, I'm going to show you the picture and mention again more, because you're losing those cells. So all the dust that you see under your bed, most likely, most of them are your skin cells. So now if you're losing every day some cells, then why you're not running out of skin? Because you have like 50 layers. So if you by 50th day, you're supposed to have no skin. The reason is regeneration. Because epithelial tissue, when get proper nutrient supply, they regenerate quickly. So that basal layer, so from apical layer, we learned those 2 terminology. From apical layer, from the top, you're losing on your skin, which is true, but from the basement layer, from the basal layer, because right underneath the basement, you have connective tissue, they have a lot of blood. So oxygen, they can diffuse. We learn diffusion from movement of molecules from high concentration to low concentration. So from a connective tissue, from the lots of blood, oxygen and other nutrients will diffuse. And once they get proper nutrients, they can divide. That's why bottom layer will have the most nutrients and they will continuously divide. That's regeneration. These are the general features of epithelial tissue. Now, one very important thing is, as I mentioned earlier, that epithelial tissues are 2 types. Like the one that we discuss here, all the covering. The other one is glandular epithelia, all the glands, exocrine and endocrine, both type of glands. Now, very important, interesting feature about glandular epithelia, they don't follow these characteristics. So all these characteristics that gland, they don't follow. They are vascular. Endocrine glands, a lot of blood vessels so that hormones can move and so on. So in the glandular epithelia does not follow these characteristics that we just discussed. This is only particularly for these epithelia. So then the question is, why do we call glandular epithelia? Because they formed from the epithelial tissue. They made from the epithelial tissue. That's why we mostly call them epithelial. So what is their functions? What is the function of epithelial tissue as a whole? This is like abbreviated version, like a short summary version of all the functions. A lot of functions you're going to learn in throughout ANP1 and ANP2. So make sure you know this bold part very well. That means epithelial tissue responsible for physical protection. So we are going to learn that a little bit more in integumentary system. Epithelial tissue responsible for absorption, such as in respiratory tract, such as in digestive tract, materials get absorbed. So you are going to detail learn in the respiratory and digestive system. Excretion, so same thing in the kidney, you're going to learn that the epithelial layers are responsible for excreting molecules that we don't need it. Produces secretions, that's also involved in digestive system, mainly that lots of epithelia, glandular epithelia produce a lot of secretion, and also glandular epithelia, part of that. Provide sensation. There are a lot of cells on the top layer of your skin which provide a lot of sensation, that meaning a lot of changes that happen in the environment to your body. And on top of that, there are some specialized epithelia such as microvilli, meaning tiny extension of the plasma membrane that increase the surface area and helps absorption and secretion much better in the digestive and the urinary tract. And also there are some cilia right here in the windpipe. Their cells have some lot of cilia, the hair-like projection that also helps the molecules that can go there to move. So these are the general functions of the epithelial tissue. Now we are going to learn classification of epithelial tissue, like how epithelial tissues are classified. They are classified in two ways. One, according to the arrangement of the cells. Two, according to the shape of the cells. According to the arrangement, there are two types, simple and stratified. Simple means just a one layer cell. That's it, that's simple. So we have a basement membrane and a one layer cell. So it's like a one-story building. Stratified, strata, is like multiple story building, whether it is 2 or 10. So when you have a like Empire State Building or any second floor, like a 2-floor house, stratified. Strata means layer. So when you have more than one layer, we call stratified cells. Now then, when I'll come back to this word 2 seconds later. So, and then classified by the shape of the cells, like how the cells looks like. If they appear flat, meaning irregular flat structure, we call them squamous. Squamous does not mean square. Squamous means an irregular flat structure. The best example is to understand squamous is the scale of fish, like irregular flat structure called squamous. Cuboidal, they look like a cube shape. Columnar, like a tall shape. Now, if you put these two together, meaning arrangement of the cells and the shape of the cells, we get 6 types. How? We get simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, or we get stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal, and stratified columnar cells based on how they're arranged and how they look like. So simple squamous epithelial tissue, simple cuboidal epithelial tissue, simple columnar epithelial tissue. Stratified squamous epithelial tissue, stratified cuboidal epithelial tissue, and stratified columnar epithelial tissue. Now, when scientists are studying, they found 2 additional varieties. One is called pseudo-stratified, and the other one is called transitional. So pseudo-stratified, pseudo means false, so they look like stratified, but they are not stratified. So that's called pseudo-stratified. Meaning when you're looking at a cells, I'll skip a few slides just to get you the picture and then I'll come back here. So right here, when you're looking at this layer, just one's glance or even if the microscopic structure, this is the drawing, that's a microscopic structure. It looks like multiple layers of cells, which is true. It looks like that. That's why the name pseudo-stratified, because as soon as you look at this, you say, yes, at least here are 2 layers of cells. That's why it's called pseudo-stratified. But if you pay attention, like serious attention, you will see all of those cells are attached to the basement membrane. So whether they are very short or they're very tall cells, they're attached to the basement membrane. It is like when you if you go for a hiking, if you look at the forest, all the trees, it's like, oh, it's like multiple layer of trees from far away. But if you really go close and study them, you'll see all the plants, they're attached to the ground. Some of them are short plants, some of them are tall plants. So it looks like multiple layers, but it actually all of them are attached to the ground. Same thing with here. So it looks like multiple layer, but they are actually, all of them are attached to the ground. So they're actually single layer. So you name them pseudo-stratified epithelia. You can find them a lot of here in the trachea. And they also do have a lot of cilia, or the hair-like extension. That's why they're sometimes called pseudo-stratified columnar, ciliated columnar epithelia. The full name, that's how they call it, like ciliated columnar epithelial tissue. And there is another variety called transitional epithelia. The transitional epithelia, they are in a specialized organ such as like urinary bladder. So I'll give you an example first to understand it. So urinary bladder, they collect urine. So your kidney continuously producing urine, and urinary bladder is collecting temporarily, and then you can excrete that from the body. So now the bladder, if it is empty, so you may just came back from a restroom, so the bladder is empty. And when you're collecting the urine, the bladder is going to be distended. So if I take the cells from an empty bladder, imagine this, it will look like the cells looks like columnar or cuboidal. But when it is stretched, like the bladder is distended, the cells are stretched, it appears like more squamous. So scientists gave them a name, transitional epithelia is in those kind of organs. So you have total, if you put all of them total, you get 8 variety. You get simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal, stratified columnar, and then pseudo-stratified and transitional epithelia. This slide is extremely important. Meaning this slide gives, I actually put all the locations here. Different book can add here and there a couple of extra. This slide, pay attention to this, requires a lot of reading. When you go to the stratified, after you read a couple of times, you will know they are rare. So most of them are rare, and some of them are like simple squamous or abundant, like those kind of things. So if you read them 5 times, and if you then write it down a couple of times, you should be good. So in your next exam, in the lecture exam, I'm definitely going to ask like 4 or 5 questions directly from this slide. Directly, like the location, like lining up the stomach. Which kind of cell line the stomach? That kind of question. Or I can say simple columnar epithelia is found in one of these organs. So you can answer those. So this requires complete reading, like study and then writing, okay? And again, different book may have 1 or 2 extra edition. I don't want to go there, just focus right over here. Now, this will also help you in lab class. In the tissue lab, basically what we do, we recognize them. We recognize, so simple squamous epithelia, you have to see under the microscope how they look like, or you have to look at the histology picture. So if you go there, okay, this is a squamous cells. So if I give you a bit, I'm talking about the lab, if I give you this picture right here, you should be able to identify this is a squamous cells. That kind of study. Again, if I give you these pictures, you should be able, okay, this is single layer because that's the basement membrane. So single layer of cells. So this is a simple cuboidal. So that's the lab part. So lab component is to identification of individual tissue. Here you need to know the location. So if you know both of them, you prepare for the lecture in the lab. So next few slides are, I mention all of them and I'm going to put more in the lab classes. So this is like, this is columnar cells. So when you, in the columnar cells, when you study columnar cells, I'm going to mention about this particular cell later on. These are called goblet cells. They look like a wine glass, like a wine goblet. They have a narrow stem and a huge top. They are those mucus in the goblet cell. They are secretory cells. I'm going to mention a little bit later. Okay. Then this is stratified, the stratified squamous. So it's a multiple layer of squamous, section taken from vagina. Stratified cuboidal cells. Rare, just like a sweat gland lining, we may have stratified cuboidal, multiple layer of cuboidal. That is stratified columnar. This is also very rare. These two, both of them are extremely rare. We already discussed this transitional and pseudo-stratified. So basically, this area requires, we already understood it, all its varieties. Now it requires a lot of study. So if you make sure you read and write and identify, lecture and the lab both. Now comes glandular epithelium, the other section of the epithelium, which does not follow all those characteristics, but they're still epithelial tissue. So there are two kinds of glands in the body, exocrine gland and endocrine gland. Exocrine gland, meaning they secrete in a pipeline, in a duct. So they have duct attached to them, duct. So if this is a salivary gland, right here underneath your ear, there's a pipeline attached to your mouth. So when they secrete, saliva comes to your mouth, nowhere else. Underneath your skin, they have oil gland, there's a pipeline attached to the surface of the skin. So when the oil comes out, it comes out right there. But endocrine gland, on the other hand, they secrete in their neighborhood. So whatever material they secrete, they catches the bloodstream, and wherever blood goes, here goes the hormones, because those secretions are known as hormones. So right here, you have a gland called thyroid gland. So they secrete, let's say, thyroid hormone, and it catches. So if if I prick your finger right here and take blood, I will get thyroid hormone there. If you take blood from your leg, you'll get thyroid hormone there. If you take blood from anywhere in the body, you will get thyroid hormone in the bloodstream because they're traveling in there. So they're ductless glands. This detail you're going to study in the A&P too. So I am not going to ask you about any gland. Only thing I can ask you the questions is the definition of endocrine gland. So endocrine gland is a ductless gland which secrete hormones. The hormones travel in the bloodstream. Good enough. Thyroid, pituitary, adrenal glands mentioned in the slide, those are examples, do not need to memorize. Exocrine gland, on the other hand, we have to study a little bit more. What kind of study you have to do? We have to just go and understand their classifications. Like how many different types of exocrine glands are there? And we classify them multiple ways. The first way to classify them is based on how they look like, meaning based on their structure. So if, based on their structure, there are two types. If they're made with one single cell, or called unicellular glands, or multiple cells, called multicellular glands. So based on how they look, or based on their structure, exocrine glands are two types: unicellular glands, multicellular glands. Unicellular gland, there is only one in your book, is goblet cell. That's the cell I was talking about, like a wine glass. That's why the name goblet. So they are on the mucous membrane. So they secrete a protein called mucin, which get hydrated and form mucus. So I'm going to mention mucous membrane at the end of the chapter anyway. So that's unicellular gland. Multicellular gland, anything else? Salivary glands, sweat gland, oil glands, those are multicellular glands. Now, when it is multicellular glands, we can divide them a little bit more. So examples like these are all multicellular glands made with multiple cells. Now, this picture may make you slightly more confused. So I would not detail study from this particular picture. This picture, I'm using it just to show you how a multicellular glands look like. And there are two things I'm going to mention, but we are actually going to study this area, okay? So in a gland, in a multicellular gland, you have two parts of a gland. This red color in this particular slide, this area indicate that's a glandular area, meaning these are the cells that secrete. And these yellow cells right here, they are indicating those are the pipeline at the duct. So these cells secrete, and these cells make the duct or the pipeline that carry the secretion. So this secretory area, these are duct area. Duct gland, they don't secrete, they just carry. Secretory area, they secrete. So now if you study that way, so based on the structure of the duct, we have two types of glands, multicellular glands, two types. One is simple gland, meaning the duct did not branched, or one is compound gland. The duct did get branched. So if you look at right here, that's a simple duct and that's a branched duct. But again, in this case, they put these both together. That's why that particular picture get confusing. So I'm going to focus right here, not going into detail. Like I'm not mentioning simple tubular or simple branch tubular, that detail not required. So I'm just using this picture, but I'm explaining here. So if the duct has a branch, we call compound gland. And if there is a single duct, we call them simple gland. And according to the secretory portion, if the secretory portion looks like a long structure, we call them tubular. If the secretory portion form like a blind pocket or like this is the example. If you go and turn into a lane in a city or in a town, wherever you are walking, and that's a dead end lane, just simply a dead end lane, that's a tubular structure. So all the house surrounding that street, I would consider them like a secretory gland, like secretory portions. Imagine that way. Or you just make a turn and you get a cul-de-sac, like a blind pocket. So all the houses are surrounding there. That's called an alveolar structure. And a third variety, which is tubular alveolar, meaning you have a same lane. Let's say you go with the lane, and at the end of the lane, you have a not sharp dead end, you have a cul-de-sac. So you have a lane and then cul-de-sac, that a tubular alveolar structure. Means both tube and a sac form. So according to the structure of the duct, multicellular glands are two types, simple and compound. According to their secretory position, there are three types, tubular, alveolar, and tubular alveolar. Now, if you put them together, this is what the explanation. We don't need to put them together. According to the method of secretion, like how they secrete, mode of secretion, okay, there are three types, monocrine gland, apocrine gland, and holocrine gland. Monocrine, most of the glands are like that. Most exocrine glands are like that. They're just simple exocytosis. We study exocytosis. They create a vesicle, they bring it, fuse with the membrane, and it's just spitting out. Apocrine, on the other hand, they collect whatever they want to secrete, they collect one side of the cell. Initially, they don't secrete individually. Exocytosis, they're not doing it. They're collecting all the secretory material one side of the cell, and then they lose that portion of the cell. So basically, part of the cytoplasm is lost. So part of the cytoplasm, they're just pinching off from the cells. That's apocrine secretion. Milk gland does that way. Holocrine, they're collecting all the secretory vesicles, and once collected, cells just burst open. So their cells kill themselves. And then they can get mature, they can get replaced by regenerating, because we learned that cells regenerate. So that's the regeneration picture, meaning they're undergoing cell division. So monocrine, simple exocytosis. Apocrine, the cell is losing part of their cytoplasm. Half of the cell is gone, and then they regrow them. Holocrine, the entire cell died. And that's how they secrete. Like oil gland is an example for this. And finally is what they secrete. Like if they secrete very watery liquid type of solutions, they call serous gland, such as parotid gland. Their secretion is like that. It's like water or honey, that kind of things. Like if it is too thin, that's serous gland. If it is too thick, that's mucous gland. Salivary glands, such as submucosal glands, some small intestine submucosal gland of the small intestine, and some salivary glands can secrete like that, mucus glands. And obviously in between called mixed gland. So mixed gland produce like neither too watery nor too thick kind of solution. So there are three types: serous, mucus, and mixed glands. That's it. This is epithelial tissue. So when you study epithelial tissue, you need to know their general function, you need to know their general features, you need to know their classification, their location in detail. Then you go to the glandular part, exocrine and endocrine. You need to know the exocrine gland detail classification. That's it. That's epithelial tissue. Then comes connective tissue, and as I was discussing earlier, that connective tissue has two things: cells and non-cellular material. Those non-cellular materials are matrix. So obviously matrix can be made with two things: inorganic and organic. So that's organic fibers and inorganic, like all the ground substances together we call matrix. So when you study epithelial tissue, you got to know their specialized cells, like what are the cells in that particular tissue. You got to know what kind of protein you have, and you got to know what kind of ground substance you have. So obviously this protein generally we can know. Ground substances like different tissue, when you learn like bones, blood, etc., in different area of the A&P, we're going to know exactly what kind of chemistry they have. Together, these two extracellular proteins and ground substance, we call them matrix. So basically, all all connective tissue, they have specialized cells and matrix. So we are going to study them like a little bit more about matrix and a little bit more about specialized cells soon. But before that, we need to know their general function. So this is an example of epithelial tissue. So they have cells like these. These are the cells, different type of cells, and these, all the protein fibers are part of the matrix. Okay. So coming back, particularly these slides of classification 2 seconds later. So right there, that's a functions. So what they do, they obviously, depending on what kind of connective tissue is extremely diverse. That's what mentioned in that slide before it. Like when you classify, it's very difficult actually to classify them. We classify them multiple ways in one particular slide. Okay, so they do structural framework. They transport oxygen, carbon dioxide, all the dissolved material, like whatever the blood and lymph they do, and protects delicate organ. That's a job of bone again. Stores energy reserves. So those are adipose tissue or fat tissue, defend body from invading microorganisms. That's cells in the blood. They do it, which are called WBC or white blood cells. So connective tissue has a variety of function depending on what type of connective tissue you're talking about. Examples of connective tissue are bones, tendons, ligaments, bottom layer of your skin, blood, lymph, adipose tissue, cartilage, areolar tissue. These are various type of connective tissue. So obviously they have a little bit various type of functions. So in order to understand this, we have to go right here. So what we did, unlike epithelial, connective tissue, we did it all different variety of classification in one together. So based on like their function, we did like supporting connective tissue, but we didn't put everything. Based just to call them supporting, because bone and cartilage, their main function is to support. Blood and lymph, we call them fluid because they are the only tissue which appear fluid in the body, like liquid. And this is so-called connective tissue proper, meaning they do have cells and the matrix. They also do have cells in the matrix. They also do have cells in the matrix. But this is how we classify it. So we class because this is how they can be recognized easily. That's how I would represent. So supporting connective tissue, bone, cartilage, fluid connective tissue, blood, lymph, and then connective tissue proper loose and dense. So we are going to learn this a little bit more detail. And then we are going to learn a little bit here because that's ANP2, that's ANP2, a little bit here, and a very few materials here because we are going to learn them in a separate chapter anyway. But before we go there, as I said, that connective tissue has two things, cells and matrix. So we need to know both cells and matrix. So we need to know the matrix a little bit more and cells a little bit more. So question is, what kind I'll give you an example first to understand the concept. Okay. So blood is a connective tissue. As I mentioned, when you centrifuge, you can get plasma on the top. That's a matrix. Bottom is the cells. In the blood is almost 50-50, like 45% cells, 55% plasma. So almost 50-50. On the other hand, if you go to the bone, you have probably like 1% cells and 99% matrix, meaning 99% chemical substances. On the other hand, if you look at adipose tissue, it's like a 99% of cells and 1% matrix. So connective tissue varies a lot. And they also do vary in what kind of cells they have and what type of matrix they consist of. So matrix of blood obviously does not match with the matrix of bone and vice versa. So these two slides particularly represent what are the specialized cells you can find in various kinds of connective tissue. So this again requires memorization. So what you must do is you read the book, connective tissue chapter. You will see they will list a series of cells, including like they call fibrocyte or fibroblast, mesenchymal cells, adipocyte, melanocyte, macrophage, microphage, mast cells, lymphocyte. All these cells are listed there. What I did here, I just mentioned the name of the cells and their main functions, like one word going, like for example, just an example, mast cells. They are the cells that are available in the connective tissue, which can release, like this is an example of the mast cells available in connective tissue, which can release histamine and heparin whenever needed. Like why? Because histamine, they trigger the inflammation, and heparin, we know they're like anticoagulant factors, so they allow blood to move in, so that inflammation is the body's response to injury. So when the body is inflamed, the body knows that that's a trouble area, so let's go for it. That is why, like even during hypersensitivity reactions, so for example, one example I want to give you to understand, let's say you have allergic reactions. So your mast cells are secreting a lot of histamine because your body is responding this. That is why you take antihistamine tablets to minimize that, so that the inflammation can be restricted, so that you can have a little bit better control right that time. So that's how, so basically this information, like adipocyte is a fat cell, so it has a lot of storage energy. It requires a lot of reading, much more than understanding. So what you are going to do, you read that 2 pages of your book very well. In each cell, they will mention like 3-4 lines. And then you will, when you come back, you will see this is the summary of those cells. Same thing here. These are the protein fibers in the matrix. Those are the cell. This is the non-cellular part, the matrix part. So what kind of protein fiber? You have collagen protein fiber, you have reticular protein fiber, you have elastic protein fiber. Collagen and reticular, they both came from a same protein unit. Elastic is a different type of protein. So collagen and reticular, they both, but one is unbranched, which is collagen. They're unbranched, and reticular, they're branched. And that makes a big difference, because collagen is very tough unbranched layer. They provide a lot of strength. Like collagen fiber with equal thickness is actually stronger than steel. They make tendons and ligaments. So that's why when you fell down, more likely that you're going to break a bone before you break a tendon and ligament. But it can snap if the tension comes from the opposite direction. So if you pull the either side of a collagen fiber, it's almost impossible to break. It's so strong. But if the force comes from the other side, it may break. Okay. So that's collagen. And reticular is more delicate. They're branched. They need the delicate networks of the. They mostly create like a capsule, like kidney is in a capsule. So that's like a reticular fiber more. Excuse me. Elastic, the name suggested. So they are like a long thin fibers, but that allow stretchability. So they come back to the original position whenever they're stretched. So these are the different type of protein fiber that is in the connective tissue. Again, how they vary a lot, depending on how much elastic they have, how much collagen they have, how much reticular fiber they have in a particular tissue, that particular tissue will show different characteristics. Okay. Again, we do not need that very detailed. We just need to know what are these, and your book does not have that very detail anyway. So now we are going back to that initial slide that I just said about connective tissue proper, loose, dense. We got to know all these areolar, adipose, and reticular tissue. Connective tissue dense, we need to know dense, regular, dense, irregular. What are they? We are going to know their examples and some of their functions. Fluid connective tissue, we need to know what is blood and a little bit about like lymph. You don't probably need to know anything detailed. And then cartilage and bone, a little bit about individual, all of that. So let's go to the areolar connective tissue. So connective tissue loose, follow the word. Connective tissue loose means they have a lot of space. So connective tissue loose are areolar, adipose, and reticular tissue. Okay. So all of them, the one thing is common, they have a lot of space. And dense, meaning they don't have space, they're tightly packed. So areolar tissue, what they are basically underneath your skin, like to deeper to the skin, but superficial to the muscles. You have a lot of areolar tissue, most places of the body. So what they do, they allow the stretching, meaning they are basically, they have space. So I'll give you an example, like when you, let's say this is a short. So if you can see it, so if it is straight right here covering my arm, but as soon as I fold my arm, the short appear a lot of wrinkles. But that doesn't happen when you contract your muscle. Why? Because let's say this is your skin, so skin is on top of the muscle. Now if you contract your muscle, skin is not getting wrinkled. Why? Because of the areolar tissue. They're like a shock absorber. They're between the muscle and the skin, so they absorb those shock and they stretch so the skin remains safe. That's the function of the areolar tissue. It's like almost everywhere in your body, very widely distributed throughout the body, and they have different type of cells. They can, like fibroblasts, they have mast cells, they have some WBC, so they're protecting any kind of invasion as well. Adipose tissue, that's the picture. Adipose tissue meaning they almost entirely have the fat cells, like they call fat cells because they entirely store fat droplets or the lipids. So what actually they do? So they also found underneath the skin. Okay, they've also found underneath the skin in some particular area and also along with some organ. So they are also insulating. Like then one of the main job is to they insulate because of they contain fat. So the heat cannot escape from the body. Particularly under the skin means in the buttocks and the breast area, we have more adipose tissue, and around the kidneys or within the abdomen or even the back of the eye, like the eye socket. So back of the eye socket, eye is sitting on a little bit of fat cushion on the back. So they, as I said, the word, the cushioning. So they are cushioning the organs, they are insulating the organs so that body can, and they store a lot of energy. That's why when you have excess food or excess energy, body store in the form of fat. So the fat cells increase their sizes and that become respective to our body. So if you lose weight, for example, if you try to lose weight, so let's say I'm trying hardest of my life to lose some weight. But what happens is if I lose, let's say I lose 10 pounds, so a lot of fat cells, they're going to be like this. So they're like a deflated balloon. Now, as the end of the 10 months, let's say I said, you know what, I don't care anymore. I'll eat a little bit this and that, the one I like. You will regain it as quick as possible. Because those cells are not dead. They're just deflated balloon. As soon as you have extra energy, boom, they're going back to a normal position. So that's why it's very difficult. But the cells are required because they store energy. There are two kinds of adipose tissue. We call them white and bat. White adipose tissue, W-A-T, B-A-T, brown adipose tissue. This is based on how they look like. White adipose tissue, they look like a pale yellow, whitish color. That's why the name. And brown adipose tissue, they appears brown. The infant and children, they have a lot brown adipose tissue in their shoulder blade in the upper area. Why it appear brown? Because it has a lot of mitochondria. Mitochondria, we know, proportional to the energy. So these are their adipose tissue in case of infant. Nowadays, we found it used to be the only infant has bad, but nowadays we know recent study shows that, but we are going to, for this purpose, we are going to say most cases, the infant and children, they have bad, but adult may also have it nowadays. Because of the obesity, we lose them. Okay, so if you are not obese, you may have a brown adipose tissue concentration high in the adult. That's a recent study shows. But again, we are not going that detail. We are just going to focus right now that brown adipose tissue that's in the kids. What is the benefit of that is they break down those fat quickly, and then they produce, because they have tons of mitochondria, they produce tremendous amount of energy as well as a lot of heat. That's why you will see even in the winter, when it's cold, the kids, they don't feel like cold. They're just running around until they're tired. But we feel sometimes cold, okay? Because that energy, you cannot trap them. The brown adipose tissue, when they break them lipid, they're continuously releasing heat, and the body uses them. Okay. Reticular connective tissue. This is like this creates a bed in some kind of organ, such as liver, spleen, kidney. They create a bed or stroma, like inside. They create a reticular, means network kind of structure. That's why the name reticular, network kind of structure, so that cells can sit and they can do their function in sitting there. So lymph nodes, bone marrow, spleen, liver, those kind of organ, they have reticular tissue, reticular connective tissue. So these are connective tissue loose, meaning they have a lot of space in it. Now connective tissue tight or connective tissue dense, okay? They are dense, like densely packed. Now when you pack something, it could be regular, it could be irregular. Like when we are packing a suitcase, like when, like, you know, some people, like in my household, like my wife, when we are traveling, if you open her suitcase, it's like nicely packed. Everything knows exactly where it is. In my case, you just could dump it, close the suitcase, done. Irregular pack. Both has values. So irregular connective tissue, they can actually get the force from multiple directions. So when the force is coming from multiple directions and they want to protect you, you need irregular. So irregular tissue, like underneath your skin, the bottom part of the skin, not underneath your skin, bottom part of the skin is dermis of the irregular tissue. That's why skin can resist the force from multiple directions. And regulars are the tendons and the ligaments. So as I said earlier, they can be extremely strong in one particular direction, but the other direction, they may be a little bit fragile. So what is tendons? What is ligaments? Tendons are the one that muscle attached to the bone. Ligaments are the one that bone attached to the bone. And there is one more item right here. It's called aponeurosis. Aponeurosis is basically a flat sheet, tendinous sheet. Like when they attach a broader muscle to several bones, like your back may have it, in the abdomen, you may have it. Like when they're attaching a broader muscle, broader sheet, you need attach broader muscle to several bones. That's aponeurosis. So tendon and aponeurosis, there's something to do with the muscle, ligament, something to do with the bone. That's muscle to bone, and this is bone to bone. Ligaments is bone to bone. So you must know these both. You know the dense regular, dense irregular. Then comes the fluid connective tissue. Blood and lymph are the two examples. You should know these two examples, and you should also know that in the blood, the matrix is called plasma, and the cells, there are three types: red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Okay, the blood vessel, they carry the blood. So arteries carry the blood away from the heart. Veins carry the blood towards the heart. This you are going to know more in detail in MP2. Now, white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets, these are the cell, but white blood cells are 5 types. You should also know that. So I mentioned right there, these are the 5 types of white blood cells. So monocyte, lymphocyte, eosinophil, neutrophil, and basophil. These are 5 types of white blood cells. So in the blood, we have three types of cell: red blood cell or RBC, white blood cell or WBC, platelets. They have three different, obviously a lot of different functions, no need. That's NP2. But what are the five types? Monocyte, lymphocyte, eosinophil, neutrophil, and basophil. Neutrophil and eosinophil also we call them macrophage, but we don't need that word. We just need to know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 names of the white blood cells. So blood, they made with plasma and the cells. Cells are also known as formed elements. That's why the word here. RBC, WBC, and platelets. WBC, 5 types: monocyte, lymphocyte, eosinophil, basophil, and neutrophil. That's it. That's good enough. Lymph, that's a fluid connective tissue. Detailed function, not required. Bone and cartilage, those are supporting connective tissue. Bone, their microscopic structure called osteon. Detail about this, actually, you can ignore this whole thing because we are going to learn in the skeletal system. When you learn bone, we are going to learn absolute detail about this. So just remember right now, bone is a supporting connective tissue. Good enough. Cartilage, also supporting connective tissue. Couple of additional information you should know right now. It's called, they're avascular, meaning they don't have blood vessels, because the chondrocyte, the cell in the cartilage, they produce chemicals that discourage the growth of the blood vessels. It's called anti-angiogenesis factor. Angio means blood vessel. Genesis means production. Anti-angiogenesis, they do not allow blood vessel production. This is very interesting because nowadays there's some medication in cancer, because what cancer cell does, they take over the body. So they take over all the nutrients from the normal cells. So normal cells cannot fight over cancer cells. So how the cancer cells survive? Then they produce blood vessels. So they encourage the growth of blood vessels so that more blood will come to them. This can act as a medicine against them. So anti-angiogenesis factor that they isolated from cartilage now being tried on those cancer growth so that they can restrict the cancer growth. Okay. And their matrix is called chondroitin sulfate. So chondrocyte is the cell, that chondroitin sulfate is the matrix, that's cartilage. We have 3 types of cartilage. You just need to know 2 pieces of information here. 3 types of cartilage, they are hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, and elastic cartilage. And right now you just need to know hyaline is the most abundant cartilage in the body. So hyaline, fibro, and elastic cartilage, they have obviously 3 different types of functions. Detail not required. Just remember, hyaline is the most abundant cartilage. That's it. That's connective tissue. Now, as I said earlier, muscle and nerve, you do not need too much detail. This is what you need to know for muscle. Muscle, 3 types of muscle. I mentioned earlier, cardiac, smooth, and skeletal. Out of the skeletal muscle is voluntary muscle. Cardiac and smooth called involuntary muscle. As far as the look is concerned, skeletal and cardiac both appear banded pattern, like a band, like a stripe, like my shirt, the one I'm wearing, like dark band, light band, dark band, light band. So it's like a stripe pattern. That's why it's called striated muscles. Okay, so this is the pattern. So that's a skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is cylindrical cells, all the stripe pattern. Again, detail not required right now because we are going to learn that in the muscle chapter. This is a cardiac muscle, detail not required. Only thing that you are going to notice, cardiac muscle is involuntary muscle, and they are communicated individually. That area is called intercalated disc. So when you look at it, because in the tissue histology lab, you have to look at them. So how do you differentiate between them? If you look skeletal muscle, they're all straight band, like a stripe. But when it comes to the cardiac muscle, they are kind of braided. So the cell create a cell-cell junction. At those junction, if you focus right here at those junction, they put a little bit extra dye. They take a little bit extra dye. So those dark line right here, those dark line that appears right there, like a darkest line right there, they appear. Those are called intercalated disc. So intercalated discs are nothing but that attachment to the cells. So they can talk to them better. Okay, so that they can work as a unit. That's why your heart, when they beat, is like a unit. We are going to learn that detail in the ANP2. But right now, so you need to know there are 3 types of muscles: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscles. This is how the smooth muscle look. They don't have a banded pattern, unlike the skeletal and cardiac. That's why these two are called striated muscles. This is how they look like. Detailed function, not necessarily, except for the fact the skeletal is a voluntary muscle. The other two are involuntary. Cardiac muscle can be recognized by intercalated disc. Both of them are like skeletal and cardiac, both of them are striated. Smooth muscle can be easily recognized. They're like a spindle shape. They have absolutely no striations. They have spindle shape, totally different type of look. So when you do the histology lab, you should be able to recognize them. So in the lab perspective, I can just give you a picture of this. It's what tissue is this? You say smooth muscle. If I give a picture of this, what tissue is this? Cardiac muscle. What is that? Intercalated disc. What is this? Skeletal muscle. That kind of questions. Nerve tissue, again, for the histology lab, what is this? Nerve tissue. Detailed neuron structure, we are going to learn later on, so we need to ignore this right now. This detail of axon, dendron, cell body, nucleus, you don't need these things. So we are going to learn all these in the detail in the neuron structure. Right now, we need to know nerve tissue, and this is how they look like. That's it. That's the entire chapter. Okay, at the end of the chapter, we see something called membranes, like body membranes. There are many membranes, particularly these are epithelial membranes. Okay, they are a mixture of epithelial and connective tissue because epithelial is always supported by connective tissue. So those are 4 types of membranes: mucous membrane, serous membrane, synovial membrane, and cutaneous membrane. So mucous membrane, they are on the like a respiratory tract, so nasal mucous membrane or digestive tract, okay, urinary tract. So those tract, the inner lining, that epithelial is mucous membrane. So those, most of those respiratory and digestive mucous membrane, they can have that goblet cell right there. So that wine glass cell, so they secrete a protein called mucin, which when hydrated become mucus. That's why when your nasal membrane are very hypersensitized because of allergic reaction or because you have inflammation or bacterial or viral infection, those membrane produce tremendous amount of mucus. Serous membrane. So serous membrane that you are supposed to know from the chapter 1, that basically serous membrane is the membrane that covers the ventral cavities. So pay attention. Serous membrane is the membrane that's a very thin membrane that covers the ventral cavities. Remember ventral cavities? In your thoracic area, we have 3 ventral cavities, 2 here on the 2 sides that house the lung. We call them pleural cavity. 1 right in the middle, within the mediastinum, we call them pericardial cavity. So these 2 membrane that cover that surrounding the lung or creating the cavity, those 2 membranes are called pleural membrane. Right here, the one that create the pericardial cavity, we call them pericardium membrane. And the abdomen pelvic is just one huge cavity, which is covered by peritoneum, because abdominal pelvic cavity, the other name is peritoneum. So together you have basically 3 types of membrane. Okay, 2 pleural membrane, that's why I said you have total 3 here, but 2 of them are same type, pleural membrane. And the middle pericardium, which covered the heart, and the bottom in the abdomen, you have the peritoneum. These 3 are serous membrane. Very thin, but they have 2 layers. So if this is heart, they have the cover, that's the pericardium. So this is heart, that's the cover, that's the pericardium. So the inner layer of the pericardium is called visceral layer. The outer layer is called parietal layer. So serous membrane has 2 layers, inner called visceral, the outer called parietal. Now what they do, they create a fluid, they secrete a fluid. That secretion is called serous fluid. That fluid is called serous fluid. So basically what they do, because they reduce the friction between 2 organs. So such as, let's say you're sitting down, let's say I'm sitting down and doing this video, and then once the video is over, I'll stand up, I'll run downstairs, for example. So my liver is going to hit the stomach, stomach's going to hit the pancreas, pancreas is going to hit the gallbladder, and all these things happening, but I don't really feel. Why? Because the organs are slide past each other very smoothly. that frictionless movement because of the serous fluid. So serous fluid reduces the friction between two organs. Okay. When the serous fluid, because of the injury, they create a lot, they secrete a lot of serous fluid, we sometimes call them transudate. So in your book, when you're reading, if you find the word transudate, don't get confused. That's basically a lot of serous fluid. We call them transudate. Synovial membrane, this membrane detail we are going to study in the joint or articulation, or when you study bones, like when bone and bone join together, some cases they join through synovial cavity. For example, your knee joint or your shoulder joint, those who offer free movement. So those synovial cavity is surrounded by synovial membrane, okay, and they secrete a fluid called synovial fluid. Again, more detail than this is not required. And cutaneous membrane, which is basically skin. So when you study cutaneous membrane in detail, we are going to study the next chapter, integumentary system, because integumentary system is the skin and all the accessory or glands and structure that we are going to study. One extra thing I would like to mention here, that out of these four membrane, remember, because if it is epithelial and connective, we have a true basement layer. So out of these four, mucous, serous, and cutaneous, they are true epithelia. Synovial membrane does not consider as true epithelial membrane. Synovial membrane is not considered as a true epithelial membrane. Why? Several reasons. One, they don't have a basement membrane. So they do not have a basement membrane. So because of lack of proper basement membrane, we cannot consider them as a true epithelial membrane. Or it actually, when we study in joint, we know that it actually develops within the connective tissue. It's not supported underneath, it's developed within the connective tissue. And third is the cell between the membrane, they have a lot of gap. Because remember, epithelial tissue are all very tight so that nothing can go through, but there is a lot of gaps. So molecules like ions and fluid can easily go from one side to another. So that is the reason we do not consider synovial membrane as a true epithelia. So at least one common reason is no basement membrane. So easy to remember, okay? So up to here, that's basically your tissue chapter. It again, before we finish, we are going detail on epithelial and connective. We need to know a few information about muscle and nerve. I already mentioned this, and we need to know this membrane. Now, when you study this, make sure it requires a lot of reading. And your second lecture exam will have a lot of questions from this particular chapter. So this particular chapter, whatever you need to understand, I'm sure you're going to know that at the end of, if you watch this lecture carefully a couple of times, but it requires a lot of study because it has a lot of material that need to be memorized. Okay, thank you.